Talking Star Wars presents Talking Avatar.
Hello, I'm Connor,
And I'm Alex.
and we are talking Star Wars, and today we are getting very close to the end of our first breakout season of Talking Avatar.
Yeah, this is where we take a brief break from our regularly scheduled Star Wars to delve into another multimedia franchise that really draws our attention for its character development and ongoing sense of world building, which is the world of Avatar: The Last Airbender and its sequel series, Legend of Korra. So we have just a couple more episodes in our little mini season here, and then we will take you back to your regularly scheduled Star Wars programming.
And today we've similarly worked on some expanded universe notions in the Star Wars world and franchise. And we're going to do the same thing today. Focus on primarily the main series of graphic novels that continues the story of Avatar: The Last Airbender. Because unlike, say, Marvel or DC, where comic books and visual media might have some connections, those aren't necessarily telling the same story. In Star Wars and in Avatar, the same story is continued with the same characters, and you can pick up reading them right after the animated series drops off.
Yeah, so for those who have listened to some of our previous expanded universe material reviews from our Star Wars series, this is very similar. And the reason we have chosen Avatar as another series to talk about is both because we're interested and because it has the same sort of exploration of characters in other media other than simply movies and television shows. So, as Connor said, today we are in the world of Avatar: The Last Airbender and The Legend of Korra, and we're going to take a look at the currently numbering 8 main graphic novel omnibuses, and then talk about some of the other smaller ones that have been sort of released around that, and make our recommendations about their importance for the story, their quality for the storytelling, and the themes that they each explore. There will be some spoilers for the content of these graphic novels, but I won't give away every plot twist, I promise.
So, what is your response to these graphic novels overall? Do you have a consensus in how they contribute to continuing the story?
So it kind of ties back to what you said earlier, Connor, in that whereas something like in Star Wars or Star Trek or some other um, primarily visual media based franchise, but then it has some ancillary materials, you sort of have the main visual media, and then the ancillary media or books can expand upon or explore like other side characters or other parts of the world. Avatar, however, has always been focused on its core cast of characters. And pretty much every comic we're going to talk about is a continuation of the stories of those core characters, the various teams to Avatar that we explore. So Aang and his crew, after the events of Sozin's Comet, for 6 volumes and some other side stories. And then Korra and Mako, Bolin, and Asami and their activities after defeating Kuvira at the end of season 4 of The Legend of Korra. There are some other smaller stories that are sort of interspersed in this period, but primarily the graphic novels for each series have served as a continuation of the themes present in the actual storyline of the world as presented by the shows.
Mhm.
As far as their quality and themes and general reaction, it's mixed as sort of any expanded media often is. They are not all of the same quality, but they're also all explore widely different themes. And personally, I feel that they are all worthwhile, especially if you're in love with the characters of Avatar. You will not, the character writing is consistent. The world feels lived in and expanded on by all these media sources. So I would recommend them for any Avatar fan in general, but we will also go volume by volume, story by story, and give our individual assessment.
Yeah, I'd say that my opinion of uh, I'll call it a series. That's a run of graphic novels. I very much appreciate the work being done in order to bridge the story of Avatar to the Legend of Korra. Because if you listen to our podcast here, that's something that I thought was done fantastically. Just that advancement in culture from one Avatar cycle to the next. And seeing that work develop and how each culture is taking those first baby steps towards like a greater connectivity and industrialization is great. Um, I think it does take a while to cook, and I personally wasn't happy with the character interaction until Imbalance, which is the final uh, installment, just because I I have an idea of these characters in my head, and I'm not sure if they were close. They were definitely close facsimiles, but the uh, all the sweetie this and sweetie that between Aang and Katara, now that they are dating, felt a little out of character. Some elements of Sokka don't seem to be as developed as he was at the end of the show, but I chalk this up to new writers collaborating with the original showrunners, uh, really getting their boots on the ground and just starting the series. And uh, my only suggestion for it would be I would love to see the ideas expanded more, broken up more, so that each omnibus isn't 3 chapters, but really giving the new characters a time to breathe so that we can learn more about them and uh, particularly the villains, just because in Avatar we are used to uh, a villain lasting 3 seasons long in the form of Ozai. In Korra, each season has its own villain. Here we have villainous roles for 3 issues before the story cycles. So I definitely would read more of the content in these stories rather than what's being contained in the 3 issues per. But that's just my nitpicking. Uh,
Yeah, so as Connor has said, there are 6 primary continuations of the story of Aang and his team Avatar following season 3. The Promise, the Search, the Rift, Smoke and Shadow, North and South, and Imbalance. These are all sequentially, they were released between 2012 and 2019, and they build upon each other, and they happen in sequence as sort of an ongoing plot. The characters grow older. Events from previous volumes are referenced in later ones. So they are meant to be read in order if you are intending to read all of them. But as Connor said, we'll start with the first one, which was the first sort of new canon media released after season 3 of Avatar: The Last Airbender, which was The Promise, released in 2012.
So we taking a look at the landscape of this graphic novel. It's about this notion of earthbenders and firebenders having to commingle and work together to kind of build a town in this Crane Island, and that does not go very well after a 100-year war.
Yeah, so The Promise grapples with the contextualizing and expanding on the sort of very happy ending provided at the end of season 3 by acknowledging that there are difficulties that you will encounter when attempting to reconcile 2 countries and societies that have been at war for 100 years. There are areas that the Fire Nation has colonized and controlled for over a century that now identify more as Fire Nation than Earth Kingdom. You have a Fire Lord in Zuko who is very insecure on his throne due to the political winds at his back, and you have an Earth Kingdom newly resurgent who is not looking to be taken advantage of again, and an Earth King in Kue who has discovered his own personal strength and is sort of throwing his weight around. So the whole area of The Promise, while it has some subplots, is focused on the continuing geopolitical conflict between the Earth King and Fire Lord Zuko. And furthermore, about Aang's role now that he is friends to both and having to serve the role of peacekeeper. And the eponymous promise that is made is Zuko forcing a promise from Aang that if it looks like Zuko is going to walk down the path of his ancestors and start another war, then Aang is supposed to kill him. Which is kind of dark for Avatar, and it's probably the
Yes.
weight of that is what holds a lot of this story together. The writers, as Connor said, are sort of finding their feet. Some of the character interactions are a little rough in this one. The art style is can be a little inconsistent, but just having the chutzpah to be like, all right, Aang has agreed to kill Zuko, and that is something that he resisted even killing Ozai, is a powerful moment.
Mhm. Yeah, and it sets up the sort of maturity of storytelling that I would expect coming from Avatar because, yes, this is a children's show. Avatar: The Last Airbender is made for kids, and The Legend of Korra is made up for adolescents who probably grew up with Avatar: The Last Airbender. But that doesn't mean that we can't tell mature stories because that, at its best, is what Avatar does. It tells very mature stories of how do you topple a leader who is um, terrorizing the world? Do you resort to murder, or are there other means of doing that? So we're not uh, strangers to mature themes in this story. So these graphic novels work best when they're grappling with issues like that.
Yeah, and other cool. We won't do a whole plot reference of the promise, but tensions grow between the Earth Kingdom and the Fire Nation and the areas that will eventually become the United Republic because of the shared heritage of individuals. There's even a earthbending assassin who attempts to kill Zuko, but it turns out she is attacking him not because she is from the Earth Kingdom, but because she identifies as a Fire Nation citizen and thinks he's betraying her nation, even though she's an Earthbender. So definitely grappling with complex ideas of identity, nationality, ethnicity, and the cultural background there. And again, this is where the promise at its best. There's also subplots about the new Avatar fan club and Katara and Aang learning how to be a dating couple now that they are both in their teens. Uh, it's a little hit or miss there.
hmm
As people who
Toph's
listen to the
metal
podcast know,
bending academy.
yeah, Toph establishes her metal bending academy and starts finding some metal benders. That's a subplot that continues throughout all 6 volumes of these current comics, and then has its own capstone with a standalone volume. So we get the first look at that here, uh, and the subplots, as Connor has indicated, are of varying quality because the at least up through Imbalance, these stories are very plot focused. It's focused on
hmm
getting the characters from point A to point B to have this interaction. There's not a lot of space for rumination, for characters just to talk to each other, which is often some of the more powerful moments in Avatar.
hmm
Just Zuko and Iroh on the adrift raft having a quiet moment together. Um, Aang on the lion turtle grappling with his past lives, Katara and Zuko having to work together to find the Southern Raiders and having a quiet moment under the full moon. So we get some of those moments, but a lot of the time it's kind of a breathless pace. And
hmm
then, oh, there's going to be an armed conflict between the Fire Nation and Earth Kingdom. And oh, Aang is having to decide if he's going to go through with his promise to kill Zuko. And Aang is arguing with his past life in Roku because Roku's like, yes, live up to your promise. Go and kill Zuko. Go and kill my grandson
hmm
or great grandson. Um, so it's a whole. So it's the pace is a little breathless, but this is still the first volume. The series is finding its feet, and I appreciate that it takes the notion that there was not an easy fix to 100 years of war. It took effort, and there were stumbling steps, but people still did their best.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a common theme that nobody is satisfied with the Avatar throughout this graphic novel series. They expect more from him, or they are dissatisfied with the choices that he's made, or because of the choices he's made, they expect him to do other things. And that's one thing that is appreciated, where it's not yeah, there is an Avatar fan club, sure, but the status quo has been shifted for 3 different cultures throughout the world. I mean, the Airbenders still need to grow and develop throughout the time of Korra, but in this time, things are shaken, and seeing people dissatisfied with that and sort of causing conflicts while waiting for answers is something that feels very natural. And yeah, it just has to be shoehorned early on with again that sort of like plot and story of, oh, this is a children's show, right? So let's have the emo and the tiny person and the uh the fat guy. They're the metal bending students, and they all have a witty rapport. And it's like this is hand waving. This is the creator, the writer of this graphic novel flexing, and I would really rather see the continuation of our story rather than these new elements. But I think that this installment, out of any, dabbles in that most heavily, and it isn't so much a factor, especially by the time we get to the end, um, where the metal benders actually have uh, plot significance and importance. But I'm sure I will complain about that when we get to not Imbalance, but Smoke and Shadow. But any other thoughts on the promise? It's a little shaky out of the gate, but I think that having more Avatar content that actually is, having the random adventures are great, but having a direct continuation is kind of uh, just a godsend to anyone who was really appreciative of the series beforehand.
Yeah, as I said, I find one of the most compelling parts to be the weight of the promise that Aang makes to Zuko and him then grappling with, again, the decision to potentially kill someone. And the other interesting part I find is Aang, for like the third time in a row, ignores Roku's advice, and Roku tries to be stern and say, "No, go through with this anyway. I'm telling you what to do." And then Aang severs his connection to Roku, his prior life, to go and make his own decisions and forge a different path forward. But for several volumes, Aang is no longer able to connect with his past lives. He deliberately severs that connection because he does not find that the advice that they're giving him to match the reality he finds himself in, which is can be viewed as a mature decision or a rash decision, or both, depending on your perspective. But I found that nuance where calling on your past lives is not an auto win card. Your previous versions of yourself may have lived a long time, but are still vulnerable to their own biases and lived experiences. Was an interesting move to make. So
Yeah, and they're
those are the
very much
parts.
used to having the world a certain way. For the majority of them, I know that there were shifts in cultures and politics, but there's nothing like the advances in civilization that are going on currently, between the time of Aang and Korra.
All right, so I think that's our final assessment of The Promise. It is the first graphic novel in this series about Aang's Team Avatar. It explores some new themes and builds up the state of the world after the Hundred Years' War. So I like it for being the first to extend the story. It stumbles a few places in its subplots and its spectacle, but does manage to kick us out of the gate and keep us going.
Mhm. And then we get to a story that uh, any, you know, true blood fan of Avatar was eager to learn more about. And that is about the mystery of Zuko's mother.
Yep. So this volume is called The Search, and the entire thrust of it is Zuko's search for his mother once he has put out the immediate fires of assuming the role of Fire Lord. So this reveals that his confrontation with Ozai at the last scene, one of the last scenes that we see Zuko in season 3, actually takes place almost a year after he's on the throne, and details him following rumors, old letters, and trying to figure out what exactly led his mother to leave the court. And it also reveals the circumstances of Ozai's marriage to Ursa, his wife, um, including that he's always been a manipulative and terrible person.
Hmm. Yeah, that was helpful. It was a helpful story in really fleshing out the rest of Zuko's upbringing because we see so much from his perspective, seeing what happened between some of the conflict between Ozai and his mother, but it's really just from his perspective, and he's not privy to a lot of the details. To round out Ursa as a full character, a living character, surprisingly, is helpful because it helps round out Zuko's character as a whole. Along with Azula's, this was a nice kind of road trip chapter, for the lack of a better term, forcing Azula to have to join up with Team Avatar and have Team Avatar contend with her.
Yeah, and she's also at this point rather mentally ill,
Mhm.
still having hallucinations due to her post-traumatic stress disorder. So Azula is not a stabilizing influence on the story, and she believes that part of the search is going to reveal that Zuko is actually illegitimate and thus
Mhm.
not the proper Fire Lord. The story does not go in that direction. It turns out that Ozai lied to Azula. Surprise, surprise.
Right.
But uh, it does explore more of Zuko now having to take on the role of almost like the older sibling caring for his mentally ill um, younger sibling, and their dynamic remains toxic and fraught throughout. Azula does not have a aha moment where it's like, oh, I've been terrible. She continues to be terrible throughout the entire
Mhm.
book. Uh,
And she is
but
left to uh, have freedom and to continue to manipulate after the story of this book.
yeah, so we get Aang and Sokka and Katara in here. They are often more foils for Zuko and Azula than anything
Mhm.
else. When you need to go talk to the ancient spirit that might know where Zuko's mother is, you kind of need to bring Aang along so he can be your magic bridge guy. And
Mhm.
you need Katara there to continually help keep Azula under control. But the emotional core of this story is about Zuko and Azula, and particularly about half of the content are flashbacks. You see that Ursa was in love with another man before marrying Ozai. That her marriage to Ozai was arranged due to a proto-eugenics program by Fire Lord Azulan to try to marry his son to an ancestor of Avatar Roku, and how controlling Ozai was, and what a terrible father and husband he was. And we learn the circumstances leading up to her exile, in that uh, she used her special knowledge of where she grew up to make a poison that could be used on Azulon, and then Ozai was secretly able to pin the blame on her, have her banished, and assume the throne in her absence. And that Ozai was entirely willing to go through with killing Zuko. Like
Mhm.
100% was on board, no question, was going to kill Zuko if Ursa did not do what he wanted.
Mhm.
We also get some really cool spirit journey in the search. We meet an ancient spirit called the Mother of Faces, who is again more benevolent than other spirits we have, but certainly not safe and certainly not human. Uh,
No.
Continuing my general preference for the way spirits are portrayed in Avatar: The Last Airbender with unique titles and personalities.
Mhm. Yeah, this felt crucial. This felt like a piece of storytelling that was necessary, and uh, I will damn and uh, argue against Avatar: The Last Airbender deciding, hey, let's have a little sneaky reference at the very end that we're in no way going to be able to pay off unless you read the comic books. That makes me sore. But for them to pay it off is good. It is helpful. It definitely makes this a highlight within the uh, different graphic novels released after this series ended.
Yeah, so that's our take on the search. Cool spirit stuff solves the last remaining primary dangling plot thread from the core series, gives you some good Zuko and Azula time, and explores again more of the political implications of Zuko trying to cling to his throne. So that takes us to the next series, which is called The Rift. And The Rift really, it has two emotional poles to it. We bring Toph back into the picture, who had been off running her metal bending academy, and Aang is now forced to step up into his spirit bridge role and primary bridge between worlds. So the one pole is between Aang and Yang Chen, his airbending air nomad ancestor, and a deal she made with a dangerous spirit. And the other pole is Toph in her relationship with her father, or lack thereof,
Mhm.
and her father entering into business deals and ignoring her existence for further industrialization. And then the plots intersect and collide when an ancient spirit is trying to wipe out a whole town because the rituals that Avatar Yang Chen put in place to keep him happy were forgotten during the Hundred Years' War.
Mhm. Another sort of theme throughout this is losing culture, losing identity. and having
Yeah,
to, right.
colonization, colonization,
Mhm.
decolonize. How do you decolonize an area after a brutal war? And the answer is you can't. You'd have to sort of continue on and forge a new identity.
Yeah, we have to grow and change, which again is part of the reason why Aang keeps having to contend with his past avatars because these past avatars are very used to how things were, how things they thought should always be. Um, but that is not the case. You need to be able to develop and change, because building bridges and maintaining balance is not about remaining stagnant. It has to grow and move with the times. So I'm rambling because I actually can't remember much of the plot of this one. I can't remember the ghost in this one, the spirit.
Yeah, so the Rift, the plot is actually pretty straightforward, and the reason I personally think the Rift is one of the better ones is because it takes a lot of time for inter-character discussion. So it is Aang exploring what it means to have to negotiate with these powerful spirits. In this case, the spirit in question is General Old Iron,
Ah, yes.
who is upset about the effects of industrialization on this area, and he'd been angry that humans have been living here anyway in the past, and Yang Chen had made a deal with him that it would be kept pristine, and there was a annual pilgrimage set up in Yang Chen's honor and so on. But then that was all forgotten in the war. And then the
Hmm.
other part is that Toph's father has become the financier of Fire Nation industrialists who are aggressively mining this area and innovating in new technologies. And he himself doesn't want anything to do with his daughter to start with, and refuses to interact with her, even though Toph, not really looking for reconciliation, does not like being ignored.
Hmm.
And then those two plots come to a head when the mining won't stop. It turns out the rich vein of iron they've been mining is the buried armor of General Old Iron, and so he
Hmm.
shows up and starts a fight. And Aang tries to negotiate, but then has to take a page out of his ancestor Kuruk's book and just straight up battle General Old Iron um, to the finish.
Yeah, that's one. Uh, it's a nature of an action series, but there's a lot of punch ups. There's not a lot of let's sit down and negotiate. I think there's some proclivity towards that, just because that is in a way how Aang defeated Ozai. But in an adventure series, you need to have the big punch ups, and if you get to have one with General Old Iron, that is still pretty darn entertaining.
Yeah, and the Rift also introduces a proto love interest for Toph in a sort of mechanist-like figure. It doesn't really pay off anywhere, but you get the sense that Toph was never one to be tied down by relationships in her life. We see her even when she's older, had never married anyone and had two children with different men.
Hmm.
So, and this series does not judge her for it. And really wondering, it's like, huh, did did you end up being Lynn's father? Who knows?
They
Um,
really heavily imply some feelings of hers toward Sokka for sure.
yeah. And then this one is also definitely shows our characters being older. Toph is now older than Aang was, so probably like 13 or 14. Aang himself is like 16 now. So time continues to go on as far as this goes, and it always is. Uh, a good part of the comics is that the characters continue to grow up and change and take on more. Aang is now tall and kind of buff, getting
Hmm.
closer to that like the whole like towering air nomad avatar that we see in the flashbacks in the Legend of Korra.
Right.
So,
Much like his son Tenzin with less facial hair.
yeah. And I guess the primary theme to note in the Rift is this one of environmentalism versus spirituality, uh, and also
Mhm.
how both can change. So where General Old Iron was previously unstoppable, now metal bending exists, and he can no longer rely on his old ways of doing things. And at the same time, Toph is upset that her father is collaborating or cooperating with some Fire Nation industrialists, but at the same time, he's also trying to foster, collaboration, but then
Mhm.
also sets the spirit. So it's all fraught and complicated. There's no easy answers.
Yeah. It's not so much just a little preview of one of our next ones. It's, person has uh ideology, and they are willing to see it through to the very end. They are clearly wrong and must be put down. That I'm simplifying some of our next villains, but that is just what it feels like.
Yeah, you never feel like General Old Iron is evil, but that he is stuck in the past in the same way Roku was in
Mhm.
The Promise, and as a spirit cannot change.
Mhm.
Yeah, so that's pretty much all I have to say about the Rift. As far as cool spirit action, we get plenty of that. As if you like Toph, this is the one that primarily centers around Toph and her metal bending academy students.
Mhm.
And if you want to see more of like proto Republic City and cooperation between various nations, you get some of that with Toph's father as well.
Yeah. This is definitely where the metal bending students come into more of their own and aren't just wallpaper decoration. Um, but yeah. Taking a look at our next book, Smoke and Shadow, this is kind of a more of a direct sequel to The Search because it deals so much with Ursa and her family trying to make a home in the Fire Nation with Zuko. And we have a seemingly spiritual antagonist threatening our heroes in this tale.
Yeah, so Smoke and Shadow, the fourth of the Aang focused graphic novels, shows what Zuko's been up to, how he stabilized the immediate external threats to his reign, and now has to contend with internal ones, to the point where there's so many assassination attempts that Kyoshi warriors become his bodyguards because they have no political connections to any faction inside the Fire Nation,
Mhm.
which but then causes some conflicts because now you have um, earthbending nationals as an independent body like Varangian Guard for the Fire Lord, which rubs some people the wrong way. Yeah, and there's a general plan to replace Zuko with another claimant to the throne. And Mai, his at this point ex-girlfriend now,
Mhm.
his family is at the heart of this plot against Zuko. Yeah, and then as Connor had said, we get these spiritual enemies who take the form of these prophesied ancient uh, spirits that are said to attack impure leaders of the Fire Nation, showing up and causing havoc.
Mhm. And it kind of feeds in on these old fears that Mai has based on her childhood and these unhappy spirits stealing children. Which she has a baby brother who ends up getting kidnapped again. This baby needs some, I don't know, better daycare, something, babysitters. Um, but it doesn't really turn out to be spirits in this case. It turns out to be our favorite. Um, I'm trying to think of something kind to call her, but I'm running out of kind things to say
Recurring
about her.
mentally unbalanced family member.
Yeah, Azula, who is just trying to push Zuko over the edge. She is uh, trying to push him to become Ozai or give up. Uh, really just trying to damage him as much as she is damaged.
Yep, and does not succeed, but then she still, denigrates Zuko at pretty much every pass. But Zuko is able to weather the storm and emerge, even more secure on his throne than he was at the start, but is unable to reconcile Azula, who escaped from prison and now is leading her own mini cult. Because a great sign of recovering from trauma when you start your own cult, right?
Yeah, that's something where I thought like, oh, Avatar is all about redemption and again finding balance. So, Azula is going to go on some journey that allows her to come back as a functional. No, she has started a cult.
Yeah, Azula does not have healthy coping mechanisms of any kind, and the series makes no bones about, man, Azula's upbringing really messed her up. So,
Yeah, and unless I'm mistaken, we don't really see uh what happens to her. She's out there.
yeah, we'll get to that with one of the more recently released standalone
Ah,
series. But yeah, Smoke and Shadow is another one where we don't get a lot of character work happening. It's a lot of breathless plot, plot, plot.
mhm.
So Oh, the
Yeah, or
spirits have attacked. Oh, there's another plot against Zuko. Oh, the Kyoshi warriors are arriving to be his bodyguards. Oh, Iroh is here to as a decoy while we look for the plotters attempting to assassinate Zuko. Oh, here's the plotters attempting to assassinate Zuko, and we're
mhm,
pursuing them. So it's just
right.
we get introspection from Zuko, but really, again, the emotional core of this one is Zuko. We don't get much, if at all, of any of the rest of Team Avatar. Suki is,
Yeah.
his head bodyguard. So that
Hmm.
is the other member of Team Avatar that we see in this series.
Right. But it's much more of a coda to Ursa's story because it takes that lingering question of, well, what would it be like returning and reconciling your current life with your past life? That's where I found value in it, just kind of successfully concluding her story.
So that's what I have to say about Smoke and Shadow. Thematically, it's dealing with things about probably legitimacy of a monarchy. Like you have a like spiritual element, you have like the actual power element, and I think it also shows about the burdens of leadership. Zuko starts to have hallucinations and active paranoia about people plotting against him. Which, to be fair, lots of people are actually plotting against him. So I don't really blame Zuko too much. But I would say if we're going to pick out the primary theme of Smoke and Shadow, it's family trauma and the burdens of leadership.
Hmm. So I don't have a lot of nice things to say about our next book, North and South. Um, I don't know why it just didn't feel like it had the same amount of care in weaving a story that dealt with the ideology as maturely or as complexly. Because it's a matter of, okay, Sokka and Katara are returning to the Southern Water Tribe. There have been a lot of advancements. It seems like a couple representatives of the North are trying to progress the South, which Katara is against vehemently. Um, and for me, that just it seems like it's out of her character because I understand that she has a strong sense of traditions and values, but she also seems to have this idea of much like Aang, just wanting to help people, wanting to enrich people's lives. So I wasn't seeing her point of view so strongly. And we also get the my dad's dating someone who's not right for him storyline, which I mean is old hat for Lifetime movies, let alone other media.
Well, I might have a kinder view of North and South. It is, I do agree that it is introduces a lot of things and resolves them very quickly. And it is not the most nuanced depiction of a lot of these events. And again, this is the last of the five novels that were, or graphic novel series that were done by a particular writer and animation and a writing and art team. And then Imbalance was done by another team. And the difference in their approaches is relatively stark in that
Hmm.
the uh, North and South, the art is probably at its, I would say, most photorealistic to the show, where it's almost directly, a still version of what you would see in the actual animated series. But also, it seems like an excuse. I mean, like it's like at the very last part of North and South, Suki, for some reason, dressed in her Fire Nation clothes, just shows up so that we can have a shot of the whole team Avatar together
Hmm.
on a beach.
Zuko just shows up, and I'm there are story reasons he needs to be a representative of the Fire Nation, well, sure, but it's I know he has lines, but it's starting to get to the point where it feels like characters are appearing out of the sake of convenience rather than actual narrative drive. So it's where elements like that are starting to wear thin. Again, like you said, the elements being introduced and then wrapped up quickly just for the sake of being able to. Like, oh, we need to set up the antagonism between the North and South poles because we get to that in Korra. Um, how about we have a radical uh, Southern tribe member just trying to commit all sorts of violence until everybody says that he's right? I don't enjoy the lack of complexity in that. Um, the lack of complexity of, oh, there's a brother and sister team. One of them will, fight for progress for, um, you know, at all cost, and the other is a bit more of a moderate. It's just this feels boilerplate. This feels cookie cutter. This doesn't feel like Avatar. This feels like Avatar fan fiction at this point. At its harshest, I should say.
Yeah, I wouldn't quite be that harsh, but again, it does feel like the sake of convenience for certain plot points to move forward. We do get some cool things in North and South. Again, we get the establishment of the difference in approaches between the North and South Pole, in that you see the North Pole attempting to assert hegemony over the South Pole, both politically and economically, and the South Pole resisting that. You get some Southern Water Tribe chi blockers, which is always an interesting twist, seeing that ability was not just limited to Ty Lee, but something that spiritual people studied in a variety of contexts. And you get the having to grapple with, again, this progress versus environmentalism area where, oh, there's oil at the South Pole, which is why the North is trying to assert its hegemony over it.
Right.
So I liked all grappling with all those questions, but the actual characters going through the motions, we spend a lot of time on Katara disapproving of Hakoda's new girlfriend, and then with lots of dramatic cliffhangers resolved a couple pages later. So, again, but art is beautiful in this one, and
I'll fight you on that too. I'll say that the art is it is visually accurate, but it is narratively confusing because just by again, it goes back to take this and stretch it, turn it from 3 series per to 6, or 3 issues per graphic novel to 6 issues per graphic novel. Give yourself the panels to show the action, because I found the action to be disorienting because I didn't know who was running up to attack whom at a given moment, just because of, okay, we have 3 issues, we need to pack the whole story in this. That's why the looser art style in the following volume I actually appreciate more, because it felt like it was a little bit more free in allowing them to demonstrate movement when they weren't tied to having to look so much like cells from the show itself.
All right, that's a fair opinion. And again, if by the art quality in North and South, it is fairly photorealistic and exactly matching that of the original show, but it can appear rather lifeless. And again, just moving these characters to get some nice big splash pages. And again, there's so much plot in this one, there's not really time for a lot of nuanced character discussion. Like, do Katara and Sokka are able to have a long conversation about their thoughts about home? Not really. Do we get a confrontation in a cave with a guy with a bone spear and he's a Southern Water Tribe chi blocker? We do get that. So does Zuko dramatically show up as representative for the peace talks from the Fire Nation? Yes, he does. So, so that's North and South, and it was, I think, intended by the writers and illustrators for this particular series to be a place where the graphic novel series could have ended permanently, thus the big splash page with all the characters at the very end. But then, of course, in the next year, it was picked up for currently the last one chronologically with Imbalance, which is, in my mind, the highest quality of the graphic novels in the Aang series that has been released to date.
I definitely agree. It feels like this is where the maturity of the story fully comes to fruition. All of the characters, the reason why they're there feels important. I don't think Zuko's in this one. Trying to scan my memory, but they bring in Suki, but they bring her in for a very intended important purpose to set up this police force in a kind of a return to what happened with the promise. We return to Crane Island and see the massive amount of quote unquote progress that is happening growing the city. And Aang has to grapple with whether this is beneficial or if this is in conflict with tradition and with spiritualism. It's a nicely mature story.
Yeah, and the Imbalance, the primary tension running throughout is one of the most strongest local leaders of Crane Island, the proto-republic city, is a bending supremacist. So sort of a reversed Amon, who instead of believing bending should be eradicated, believes that non-benders are second-class citizens, and has this sort of maternalistic, paternalistic site where they need to submit to the rulership and oversight of benders who are, superior in power and wisdom due to their connection to the elements. Which it doesn't, which makes perfect sense for the setting, but is the first time we've had someone with that sort of explicit, almost fascist ideology,
Mhm.
and is personified in actual characters of her two daughters, one of whom is a bender, one of whom is not, who she keeps giving jobs to and praising the bending one and berating the non-bending one.
Mhm.
So yeah, the antagonist of Imbalance I find to be the most nuanced.
She doesn't even outright dismiss her non-bending daughter. She's dismissing non-benders in within earshot of her daughter. But she loves her daughter, as she says. But she has her place, and the bending daughter has a higher place in the hierarchy, in her mind, at least.
Yeah, and one of my favorite scenes from this one is there is it's like a 3-page ongoing conversation with lots of text balloons with Aang and Katara walking down a beach talking about their relationship, what Aang should do as the role of the Avatar, what is his responsibility, what is not, how he sees the future. Katara using her own experiences to provide advice, and just them drawing on each other for support as they face a challenging situation. So
Mhm.
the fact that they took the time just to show the two of our main characters walking down a beach and having a heart to heart conversation that wasn't just cookie cutter, haha, haha, was a sign of really mature storytelling to me.
Right. We also get one of those conversations between Aang and Sokka because Sokka is a non-bender. And so they're able to distill the conflict of the story within a conversation. So we learn from Sokka that, okay, we had this world that was ran by benders, ruled by benders, saved by benders. Now non-benders are starting to get the leg up in terms of having technology that allows them to perform and have the same value as a bender can. So now the benders are starting to feel threatened. Perfect way to uh, encapsulate what this story is about, and it happens in a conversation, and it happens in dialogue, and it just felt so good to like have that story unfold that way. Plus, I feel like this volume is throwing shade at how Aang and Katara were written because we see Sokka and Suki having cutesy cuddly moments, and Aang says to Katara, "We weren't that bad, were we?" When and I'm sitting laughing 31 years old. It's like, yeah, you guys were. You were bad. You're awkward teenagers, which I guess is realistic, so I can't complain too much.
I was going to say the art style imbalance is also deliberately a little bit more less directly adapted from the show. It's a little more loose. It's a little more impressionistic is the wrong word, but less clean lines and more senses of movement, more
Hmm.
earthy almost. And I really
Gestural.
appreciate that. Yeah, in that to show the difference in like movement. So it could be a little jarring for people coming from the previous 5 graphic novel series, but I personally found it a nice change of pace.
Yeah, I love this art style, and it's not to uh, uh, punch down on the previous art style. I just felt like and it's not even a critique of the art. It was more a critique of the how are you going to utilize 3 comic book issues to the fullest? You don't have a lot of time here. You don't have a lot of real estate in order to get your ideas across. And um, Imbalance doesn't struggle with that like other volumes have, which irritates me because it's the last one that is, devoted to Aang. I was thinking, yeah, we've hit the stride. Like we've got the, uh, all the groundwork laid for getting us to Republic City. Uh, but now that part is going to be hopefully lovely animated into a film of itself with a 20 something team Avatar, uh, maybe participating with Azula. But I guess that leads into the final standalone graphic novels that I've not gotten to, but
Yeah, so I believe we will cover those in a part 2, where we will talk
sounds
about
good.
the standalone graphic novels, as well as the fewer number of Korra comics as well. And that will form a part 2 of our EU review on the graphic novels of the world of Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Yeah, after one more Avatar episode, we've got our second season of Talking Star Wars coming up, talking about some of the developments that have occurred since we've last spoken with you all about Star Wars. But then during a little hiatus from that, we'll get back to talking Avatar again.
All right,
I'm
well, thank you
personally curious to see what happens to Azula. That's before it was Azula and Zuko's mom. Now I need to see what happens to Azula. There's nothing, no sign of her in Korra. There's no daughter of Azula. So, her continuation is something that I'm quite interested in seeing.
Yeah, so join us next time for discussion of more of the standalone comics of uh, Avatar: The Last Airbender, how we expand on the world of the Legend of Korra after the defeat of Kuvira, and just a look forward at other expanded universe materials that are always building upon the world building blocks of the world of Avatar.
Alrighty. Thank you for your time, and until next time.